Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue reading Zane Gray's The Desert of Wheat from Chapter 29. Wheat deals, I reckon, mostly, he said, and maybe I'll run over to Washington. He turned the end, puffing at his cigar, and calmly met her direct gaze. If there were really more than he claimed in his going, he certainly did not intend to tell her. Lenore tried to still her mounting emotion. These days she seemed all imagination. Then she turned away her face. Will you try to find out if Kurt Dorn died of his wound and all about him? She asked, steadily but very low. Lenore, I sure will, he exclaimed with explosive emphasis. No doubt the sincerity of that reply was an immense relief to Anderson. Once in New York, I can pull wires if need be. I absolutely promise you I'll find out all you want to know. Lenore bade him goodbye and went to her room, where calmness deserted her for a while. Upon recovering, she found that the time set for her father's departure had passed. Strangely, then the oppression that had weighed upon her so heavily eased and lifted. The moment seemed one beyond her understanding. She attributed her relief, however, to the fact that her father would soon end her suspense in regard to Kurt Dorn. In the succeeding days, Lenore regained her old strength and buoyancy, and something of a control over the despondency which at times had made life misery. A golden day of sunlight and azure blue of sky ushered in the month of June. Many Waters was a world of verdant green. Lenore had all she could do to keep from flying to the slopes. But as every day now brought nearer the possibility of word from her father, she stayed at home. The next morning about 9 o'clock, while she was at her father's desk, the telephone bell rang. It did that many times every morning, but this ring seemed to electrify Lenore. She answered the call hurriedly. Hello, Lenore, my girl, how are you? Came rolling on the wire. Dad, is it you? Cried Lenore wildly. Sure is, just got here. Are you and the girls okay? Oh, we're fine. Oh, Dad. You needn't send the car, I'll hire one. Yes, but Dad, oh, tell me. Wait, I'll be there in 5 minutes. She heard him slam the receiver, and she leaned there palpitating with queer vacant sounds of the telephone filling her ear. 5 minutes, Lenore whispered. In 5 more minutes she would know. They seemed an eternity. Suddenly a flood of emotion and thought threatened to overwhelm her. Leaving the office, she hurried forth to find her sisters, and not until she had looked everywhere did she remember that they were visiting a girlfriend. After this, her motion seemed ceaseless. She could not stand or sit still, and she was continually going to the porch to look down the shady lane. At last a car appeared, coming fast. Then she ran indoors quite aimlessly and out again. But when she recognized her father, all her outward fears and tremblings vanished. The broad brown flash of his face was reality. He got out of the car lightly for so heavy a man, and taking his valise, he dismissed the chauffeur. His smile was one of gladness, and his greeting a hearty roar. Lenore met him at the porch steps, seeing in him, feeling as she embraced him that he radiated a strange triumph and finality. Say, girl, you look something like your old self, he said, holding her by the shoulders. Fine, but you're a woman now. Where are the kids? They're away, replied Lenore. How you stare, laughed Anderson, as with arm around her he led her in. Anything queer about your dad's handsome mug? His jocular tone did not hide his deep earnestness. Never had Lenore felt him so forceful. His ruggedness seemed to steady her nerves that again had begun to fly. Anderson took her into his office, closed the door, threw down his valise. Great to be home, he exploded with heavy breath. Lenore felt her face blanch, and that intense quiver within her suddenly stilled. Tell me, quick, she whispered. He faced her with flashing eyes, and all about him changed. You're an Anderson. You can stand shock. Any shock but suspense. I lied about that wheat deal, about my trip to New York. I got news of Dorn. I was afraid to tell you. Yes, Dorn is alive, went on Anderson. Lenore's hands went out in mute eloquence. He was all shot up. He can't live, hurried Anderson hoarsely, but he's alive. He'll live to see you. Oh, I knew, whispered Lenore, clasping her hands. Oh, thank God. Lenore, steady now, you're getting shaky. Brace there, my girl. Dorn's alive. I've brought him home. He's here. Here! Screamed Lenore. Yes, they'll have him here in half an hour. Lenore fell into her father's arms, blind and deaf to all outward things. The light of day failed, but her consciousness did not fade. Before it seemed a glorious radiance that was the truth lost for the moment, blindly groping in whirling darkness. When she did feel herself again, it was as a weak, dizzy, palpitating child, unable to stand. Her father, in alarm and probable anger with himself, was coaxing and swearing in one breath. Then suddenly the joy that had shocked Lenore almost into collapse forced out the weakness with amazing strength. She blazed, she radiated, she burst into utterance too swift to understand. Hold on there, girl, interrupted Anderson. You got the bit in your teeth. Listen, will you? Let me talk. Well, there now. Sure, it's all right, Lenore. You made me break it sudden-like. Listen. There's all summer to talk. Just now you want to get a few details. Get 'em straight. Dorn is on the way here. They put his stretcher, we've been backing him on one, into a motor truck. There's a nurse come with me, a man nurse. We'd better put Dorn in Mother's room. That's the biggest and airiest. You hurry up and open the windows and fix a bed, and don't go out of your head with joy. It's sure more'n we ever hoped for to see him alive, to get him home. But he's done for, poor boy. He can't live, and he's in such a shape that I don't want you to see him when they fetch him in. Savvy, girl? You'll stay in your room till we call you. And now rustle. Lenore paced and crouched and lay in her room, waiting, listening with an intensity that hurt. When a slow procession of men, low-voiced and soft-footed, carried Kurt Dorn into the house and upstairs, Lenore trembled with a storm of emotion. All her former agitation, love, agony, and suspense, compared to what she felt then, was as nothing. Not the joy of his being alive, not the terror of his expected death, had so charged her heart as did this awful curiosity to see him, to realize him. At last a step, a knock, her father's voice. Lenore, come! Her ordeal of waiting was over. All else she could withstand. That moment ended her weakness. Her blood leaped with the irresistible, revivifying current of her spirit. Unlocking the door, Lenore stepped out. Her father stood there with traces of extreme worry fading from his tired face. At sight of her, they totally vanished. Good, you've got nerve. You can see him now alone. He's unconscious. But he's not been greatly weakened by the trip. His vitality is wonderful. He comes to once in a while. Sometimes he's rational. Mostly, though, he's out of his head. And his left arm is gone. Anderson said all this rapidly and low while they walked down the hall toward the end room, which had not been used since Mrs. Anderson's death. The door was ajar. Lenore smelled strong, pungent odors of antiseptics. Anderson knocked softly. Come out, you men, and let my girl see him, he called. Dr. Lowell, the village practitioner Lenore had known for years, tiptoed out, important and excited. Lenore, it's too bad, he said kindly, and he shook his head. Another man glided out with the movements of a woman. He was not young. His aspect was pale, serious. Lenore, this is Mr. Jarvis, the nurse. Now go in, and don't forget what I said. She closed the door and leaned back against it, conscious of the supreme moment of her life. Dorn's face, strange yet easily recognizable, appeared against the white background of the bed. The moment was supreme because it showed him there alive, justifying the spiritual faith which had persisted in her soul. If she had ever, in moments of distraction, doubted God, she could never doubt again. The large room had been bright, with white curtains softly blowing inward from open windows. As she crept forward, not sure on her feet, all seemed to blur, so that when she leaned over the still face to kiss it, she could not see clearly. Her lips quivered with that kiss, and with her sob of thankfulness. "My soldier!" She prayed then, with her head beside his on the pillow. And through that prayer and the strange stillness of her lover, she received a subtle shock. Sweet it was to touch him as she bent with eyes hidden. Terrible it would be to look, to see how the war had wrecked him. She tried to linger there, all tremulous, all gratitude, all woman and mother, but an incalculable force lifted her up from her knees. "Ah," she gasped, as she saw him with cleared sight. A knife blade at her heart. Kurt Dorn lay before her gaze, a man, and not the boy she had sacrificed to war. A man by a larger frame and by older features, and by a change difficult to grasp. These features seemed a mask, transparent, unable to hide a beautiful, sad, stern, and ruthless face beneath, which in turn slowly gave to her startled gaze sloping lines of pain and shadows of gloom, and the pale set muscles of forced manhood, and the faint hectic flush of fever and disorder and derangement. A livid, angry scar, smooth yet scarcely healed, ran from his left temple back as far as she could see. That established his identity as a wounded soldier brought home from the war. Otherwise, to Lenore, his face might have been that of an immortal, suddenly doomed with the curse of humanity, dying in agony. She had expected to see Dorn bronzed, haggard, gaunt, starved, bearded, and rough-skinned, bruised and battered, blinded and mutilated, with gray in his fair hair. But she found none of these. Her throbbing heart sickened and froze at the nameless history recorded in his face. Was it beyond her to understand what had been his bitter experience? Would she never suffer his ordeal? Never. That was certain. An insupportable sadness pervaded her soul. It was not his life she thought of, but the youth, the nobility, the splendor of him the war had destroyed. No intuition, no divination, no power so penetrating as a woman's love. By that piercing light, she saw the transformed man. He knew. He had found out all of physical life. His hate had gone with his blood. Deeds of terror had left their imprint upon his brow, in the shadows under his eyes that resembled blank walls, potent with invisible meaning. Lenore shuddered through all her soul as she read the merciless record of the murder he had dealt, of the strong and passionate duty that had driven him, of the eternal remorse. But she did not see or feel that he had found God, and stricken as he seemed, she could not believe he was near to death. This last confounding thought held her transfixed and thrilling, gazing down at Dorn until her father entered to break the spell and lead her away. Chapter 30. It was night. Lenore should have been asleep, but she sat up in the dark by the window. Underneath on the porch, her father, with his men as audience, talked like a torrent. And Lenore, hearing what otherwise would never have gotten to her ears, found listening irresistible. Slow, dragging footsteps and the clinking of spurs attested to the approach of cowboys. "Howdy, boys. Sit down and be particular quiet. Here's some smokes." "I'm wound up and gotta go off or bust," Anderson said. Well, as I was saying, we folks don't know there's a war from all outward sign here in the Northwest, but in that New York town where I just come from, Lord Almighty, what's goings on? Boys, I never knew before the Grand it was going to be American. New York's got the people, the money, and it's the outgoing and incoming place of all pertaining to this war. The Liberty Loan Drive was on. The streets were crowded, bands and parades, grand opera stars singing on the corners, famous actors selling bonds, flags and ribbons and banners everywhere, and every third man you bumped into wearing some kind of uniform. And the women were running wild like a stampede of 2-year-olds. I rode down Fifth Avenue on one of them high-top buses with seats on. Talk about your old stagecoach. Why, these buses had 'em beat a mile. I've rode some in my day, but this was the ride of my life. I couldn't hear myself think. Music at full blast, roar of traffic, voices like whispering without end, flash of red and white and blue, shine of 1,000 automobiles down that wonderful street that's like a cannon. And up overhead a huge cigar-shaped balloon, and then an airplane sailing swift and buzzing like a bee. Them was the first airships I ever seen. No wonder Jim wanted to. Anderson's voice broke a little at this juncture and he paused. All was still except the murmur of the running water and the song of the insects. Presently Anderson cleared his throat and resumed. I saw 500 Australian soldiers just arrived in New York by way of Panama. Lean, wiry boys like Arizona cowboys. Looked good to me. You ought to have heard the cheering, roar and roar everywhere they marched along. I saw United States sailors, Marines, soldiers, airmen, English officers, and Scotch soldiers. Them last sure got my eye. Funny plaid skirts they wore, and they had bare legs. 3 I saw walk lame, and all had medals. Someone said the Germans called these Scotch ladies from hell. When I heard that, I had to ask questions, and I learned these queer-looking half-women dressed fellows were simply hell with cold steel. And after I heard that, I looked again and wondered why I hadn't seen it. I ought to know men. Then I saw the outfit of Blue Devil Frenchmen that was sent over to help stimulate the Liberty Loan. And when I seen them, I took off my hat. I've known a heap of tough men and bad men and handy men and fighting men in my day, but I reckon I never seen the like of the Blue Devils. I can't tell you why, boys. Blue Devils is another German name for a regiment of French soldiers. They had it on the Scotchmen. Any Western man, just to look at them, would think of Wild Bill and Billy the Kid and Geronimo and Custer and see that maybe the whole 4 mixed in one might have made a Blue Devil. My young friend Dorn, that's a dying upstairs now, he had a name given to him. 'Pears that this war time's like the old days when we used to hit on right pert names for everybody. Demon Dorn they called him, and he got that handle before he ever reached France. The boys of his outfit gave it to him because of the way he run wild with a bayonet. Yeah, I don't want my girl Lenore ever to know that. A soldier named Owens told me a lot. He was a corporal of Dorn's outfit, a sort of foreman, I reckon. Anyway, he saw Dorn every day of the months that they were in the service, and the shell that done Dorn made a cripple of Owens. This fellow Owens said Dorn had not got so close to his bunkmates until they reached France. And then he begun to have influence over them. Owens didn't know how he did it. In fact, never knew it at all until the outfit got to the front, somewhere in northern France in the front line. They were dazed in the first line, close up to the Germans, watching and sneaking all the time, shooting and dodging, but they never had but one real fight. That was when one morning the Germans came piling over on a charge, far outnumbering our boys. And then it happened. Lord, I wish I could remember how Owens told that scrap. Boys, you never heard about a real scrap. It takes war like this to make men fighters. Listen now, and I'll tell you some of the things that come off during this German charge. I'll tell them just as they come to mind. There was a boy named Griggs who ran the German barrage, and that's a gauntlet, 7 times to fetch ammunition to his parts. Another boy in the same errand was twice blown off the road by exploding shells, and then went back. Owens told of 2 of his company who rushed a bunch of Germans, killed 8 of them, and captured their machine gun. Before that German charge, a big shell came over and kicked up a hill of mud. Next day, the Americans found their sentinel buried in mud, dead at his post, with his bayonet presented. Owens was shot just as he jumped up with his pards to meet the charging Germans. He fell and dragged himself against a wall of bags where he lay watching the fight. And it so happened that he faced Dorn's squad, which was attacked by 3 times their number. He saw Dorn's shot go down and thought he was done, but no. Dorn came up with one side of his face all blood. Dixon, a college football man, rushed a German who was about to throw a bomb. Dixon got him and got the bomb too, and it went off. Little Rogers, an Irish boy, mixed it with 3 Germans and killed one before he was bayoneted in the back. Then Dorn, like the demon they'd named him, went on the stampede. He had a different way with a bayonet, so Owens claimed. And Dorn was heavy, powerful, and fast. He lifted and slung those 2 Germans one after another, quick as that. Like you toss a couple of wheat sheaves with your pitchfork, and he sent them rolling with blood squirting all over. And then 4 more Germans were shooting at him, right into their teeth. Dorn run laughing wild and terrible, Owens said, and the Germans couldn't stop that flashing bayonet. Dorn ripped them all open, and before they'd stop flopping, he was on the bunch that had killed Brewer, and were making it hard for his other pards. Phew! Owens told it all as if it took lots of time. But that fight was like lightning, and I can't remember how it was. Only Demon Dorn laid out 9 Germans before they retreated. 9! Owens seen him do it, like a mad bull loose. And then the shell came over, and that put Dorn out. And Owens too. Well, Dorn had a mangled arm and many wounds. They amputated his arm in France, patched him up, and sent him back to New York with a lot of other wounded soldiers. They expected him to die long ago, but he hangs on. He's full of lead now. What a hell of a lot of killing some men take. My boy Jim would have been like that. So there, boys, you have a little bit of American fighting come home to you, straight and true. I say that's what the Germans have roused. Well, it was a bad day for them when they figured everything on paper, had it all cut and dried, but failed to see the spirit of men. Lenore tore herself away from the window so that she could not hear any more. And in the darkness of her room she began to pace to and fro, beginning to undress for bed, shaking in some kind of frenzy, scarcely knowing what she was about, until sundry knocks from furniture and the falling over a chair awakened her to the fact that she was in a tumult. "What am I doing?" she panted in bewilderment, reaching out in the dark to turn on the light. Like awakening from a nightmare, she saw the bright light flash up. It changed her feeling. Who was this person whose image stood reflected in the mirror? Lenore's recognition of herself almost stunned her. What had happened? She saw that her hair fell wildly over her bare shoulders. Her face shone white, with red spots in her cheeks. Her eyes seemed balls of fire. Her lips had a passionate, savage curl. Her breast, bare and heaving, showed a throbbing, tumultuous heart. And as she realized how she looked, it struck her that she felt an inexplicable passion. She felt intense as steel, hot as fire, quivering with the pulsation of rapid blood, a victim to irrepressible thrills that rushed over her from the very soles of her feet to the roots of her hair. Something glorious, terrible, and furious possessed her. When she understood what it was, she turned out the light and fell upon the bed, where as the storm slowly subsided, she thought and wondered and sorrowed and whispered to herself. The tale of Dorn's tragedy had stirred to the depths the primitive hidden and unplumbed in the unknown nature of her. Just now she had looked at herself, at her 2 selves, the white-skinned and fair-haired girl that civilization had produced, and the blazing, panting, savage woman of the bygone ages. She could not escape from either. The story of Demon Dorn's terrible fight had retrograded her for the moment to the female of the species, more savage and dangerous than the male. No use to lie, she had gloried in his prowess. He was her man, gone out with a club to beat down the brutes that would steal her from him. Alas, what are we? What am I? She whispered. Do I know myself? What could I not have done a moment ago? She had that primitive thing in her, and though she shuddered to realize it, she had no regret. Life was life. That Dorn had laid low so many enemies was grand to her, and righteous, since these enemies were as cavemen come for prey. Even now the terrible thrills chased over her. Demon Dorn, what a man! She had known just what he would do and how his spiritual life would go under. The woman of her gloried in his fight, and the soul of her sickened at its significance. No hope for any man or any woman excepting God. These men, these boys, like her father and Jake, like Dorn and his comrades, how simple, natural, inevitable, elemental they were. They loved to fight. They might hate it too, but they loved him most. Life of men was all strife, and the greatness in them came out in war. War searched out the best and the worst in men. What were wounds, blood, mangled flesh, agony, and death to men? To those who went out for liberation of something unproven in themselves. Life was only a breath. The secret must lie in the beyond, for men could not act that way for nothing. Some hidden purpose through the ages. Anderson had summoned a great physician, a specialist of world renown. Lenore, of course, had not been present when the learned doctor examined Kurt Dorn, but she was in her father's study when the report was made. To Lenore, this little man seemed all intellect, all science, all electric current. He stated that Dorn had upward of 25 wounds, some of them serious, most trivial, and all of them combined not necessarily fatal. Many soldiers with worse wounds had totally recovered. Dorn's vitality and strength had been so remarkable the great loss of blood and almost complete lack of nourishment had not brought about the present grave condition. He will die, and that is best for him, said the specialist. His case is not extraordinary. I saw many like it in France during the first year of the war when I was there. But I will say that he must have been both physically and mentally above the average before he went to fight. My examination extended through periods of his unconsciousness and aberration. Once, for a little time, he came to, apparently sane. The nurse said he had noticed several periods of this rationality during the last 48 hours, but these and the prolonged vitality do not offer any hope. An emotion of exceeding intensity and duration has produced lesions in the kinetic organs. Some passion has immeasurably activated his brain, destroying brain cells which might not be replaced. If he happened to live, he might be permanently impaired. He might be neurasthenic, melancholic, insane at times, or even grow permanently so. It is very sad. He appears to have been a fine young man, but he will die, and that really is best for him. Thus, the man of science summed up the biological case of Kurt Dorn. When he had gone, Anderson wore the distressed look of one who must abandon his last hope. He did not understand, though he was forced to believe. He swore characteristically at the luck, and then at the great specialist. I've known Indian medicine men who could give that doctor cards and spades, he exploded with gruff finality. Lenore understood her father perfectly and imagined she understood the celebrated scientist. The former was just human, and the latter was simply knowledge. Neither had that which caused her to go out alone into the dark night and look up beyond the slow-rising slope to the stars. These men, particularly the scientist, lacked something. He possessed all the wonderful knowledge of body and brain, of the metabolism and chemistry of the organs, but he knew nothing of the source of life. Lenore accorded the science its special place in progress, but she hated its elimination of the soul. Stronger than ever, strength to endure and to trust pervaded her spirit. The dark night encompassing her, the vast, lonely heave of Wheat Slope, the dim sky with its steady stars, these were voices as well as tangible things of the universe, and she was in mysterious harmony with them. Lift thine eyes to the hills from whence cometh thy help. The day following the specialist's visit at Dorn surprised the family doctor, the nurse, Anderson, and all except Lenore by awakening to a spell of consciousness which seemed to lift, for the time at least, the shadow of death. Kathleen was the first to burst in upon Lenore with the wonderful news. Lenore could only gasp her intense eagerness and sit trembling, hands over her heart, while the child babbled. "I listened and I peeped in," was Kathleen's reiterated statement. "Kurt was awake. He spoke too, but very soft. Say, he knows he's Ab many waters. I heard him say Lenore. Oh, I'm so happy, Lenore, that before he dies, he'll know you and talk to you." "Hush, child," whispered Lenore. "Kurt's not gonna die." But they all say so. That funny little doctor yesterday, he made me tired, but he said so. I heard him as Dad put him into the car." "Yes, Kathy, I heard him too, but I do not believe," replied Lenore dreamily. "Kurt doesn't look so sick," went on Kathleen. Only I don't know what different, I guess. I'm crazy to go in to see him. Lenore, will they ever let me?" Their father's abrupt entrance interrupted the conversation. He was pale, forceful, as when issues were at stake but were undecided. "Kathy, go out," he said. Lenore rose to face him. "My girl, Dorn's come too, and he's asked for you. I was for letting him see you, but Lowell and Jarvis say no, not yet. Now he might die any minute. Seems to me he ought to see you. It's right. And if you say so, yes," replied Lenore. "By heaven, he shall see you then," said Anderson, breathing hard. "I'm justified, even if he did not finish his significant speech, but left her abruptly. Presently Lenore was summoned. When she left her room, she was in the throes of uncontrolled agitation, and all down the long hallway she fought herself. At the half-opened door she paused to lean against the wall. There she had the will to still her nerves, to acquire serenity, and she prayed for wisdom to make her presence and her words of infinite good to Dorn in this crisis.